Welcome to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle King. And last week we talked about something specific, special, and something that if you did not watch it, you need to go back and watch it. We talked about this idea of contagious culture. What is it, where it comes from, and the importance of it within educational systems. In short, culture, the overall word, comes from the Latin root cultus, which means to care. I referenced a book, Culture Code. It's linked in the bio below. And the idea of contagious culture, just like anything that's contagious, is the spreading of this feeling of caring, compassion, empowerment, of affirmation, motivation, inspiration. And just imagine what our educational systems can be, what our cultures could be, what the improvement of our academic success could be if we have teachers, parents, principals, assistant principals, and our students, all the stakeholders within the educational environment on one accord. That is what great culture is. See, a lot of times we think that culture is not as important as content. We focus and invest heavily in curriculum, professional development. We focus heavily on the idea of training to the standard and benchmarks and performance-based instruction and differentiation and all of these different things. Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction, MTSS, and all of this educational jargon, but we don't ever really focus on how to communicate to students when they're going through some challenges, how to help our students resolve conflict in the classroom, how to see our students better and help them be more representative of the values and the beliefs and the mission that our school represents. How can we help diffuse conflicts or disagreements within parents? And how can we create this idea of relationships built on a sense of transparency and vulnerability across all of our school systems? See, we have to start looking at our educational environments as a relationship. It's a relationship between the teacher and the student. It's a relationship between the student and the principal. It's a relationship between the teacher and the parent, and the parent and the school, and the school and the school community, and all of these different things. And just like in any relationship, if someone's not giving you the full truth or all the truth, don't you find it hard to trust them? If someone's only calling you when there's a problem or a challenge, isn't it hard for you to feel a sense of positivity? If someone's not fully transparent with all of the data or the information, don't you find it challenging to continue to keep coming to that person? If someone's not helping your child or helping you in a time of need and just labeling you, don't you find it hard to be able to open up and be vulnerable to that person? See, we have to consider these things in our own personal relationships and how we deal and develop relationships within our students. So the idea of this specific episode is to help you infuse and create the heart of harvest within yourself first so that we can integrate or spread it across our educational institutions. See, everything that I'm going to say on every episode is about you first, because I believe and I'm under the impression that better people produce better educators. Better people produce better principals. And ultimately, better people produce better outcomes within the classroom, within the school system, and within our communities. And if I'm showing up as the best version of myself, then I can guarantee that my students are going to get the best version of me on a daily basis. But if I'm showing up with all the baggage and all the trash and all of the issues, then all I'm doing is pouring that into my classroom, into my students on a daily basis. And they're going out of my door, and they're going out of my classroom, and they're leaving our school building with all of my stuff and their stuff on top of them. So today I'm going to give you a five-step model that I'm using to be able to transform the culture across school systems, not just in Charlotte, but across the nation. But this idea of a heart of harvest isn't just mine. One day I was at church, and I was listening to my pastor talk about his experience getting into ministry. He talked about him leaving from where he was as a pastor at a mega church with thousands of members and moving across the country to a smaller church. And instead of him being given the opportunity to present on stage, he was forced in a classroom to serve as a snack passer-outer is what he calls it. And he thought that because of his credentials and because of his merit and because of all of the different titles that he once had, that he deserved to be able to be on stage, and he was above being the snack passer-outer. But boy, was he up to learn something in this moment. And he shared this moment when he was working in the children's ministry as the snack passer-outer, and someone else was leading the children's ministry where he was able to work with the youth to know God. There was a specific time that he mentioned that a young lady came up to him and she said, Pastor Brian, I can't find my name tag. Pastor Brian, I can't find my name tag. And she was in tears, And at the moment, he's explaining this story in a way of, baby, I could just get you another name tag. She said, no, Pastor Brian, I want my name tag. And then she storms away and she goes to the other pastor that was in the room. And he's looking around, he's looking under the seat, and he asked her, the other pastor asked her, baby, where's your name tag? She said, I don't know. And she's hysterical and crying. So he gets down on one knee. He looks at her in her eyes. And he said, baby, we're going to pray. And his word to her that day was, nothing is lost, and with God, everything shall be found. A few minutes later, he shares a story that she says, Pastor Brian, I found my name tag. And he's explaining this story, and he said, there must have been something going on. Like, no way it was this easy. But the message that he taught is that at that time, he didn't have the heart for service. He just was a volunteer. And how he watched that other pastor get down on one knee, console her, pray with her, give her a word of scripture, calm her down, and be able to trust in something bigger than herself. Now, I don't know what you believe in. And this isn't a story about faith. This is a story about heart. See, we're not in education to just get a paycheck. We're not in education to just look at this as any other job. We're not in education to be able to just be another teacher. We're in education to get down on one knee sometimes, to give that student that word of encouragement, to give that student that word of affirmation, to get down and get dirty with our students, to get on their level and be able to help them see something in themselves that they once wouldn't have seen. Our goal is to be able to get down on that one knee sometimes and help them find that gift, find that talent, find that calling, or find that answer that they can't seek on the whiteboard. And in this 5-step model, it's an acronym by the name of HEART, by the word heart. And the H represents and stands for helping students see the best in themselves. See, a lot of times we're judging our students. We're putting labels on our students. And I know if you're not that educated, I promise you're probably not that educated because I know you. You're not that educated that challenging student that ran you through the ringer, and you, after they leave your class, you're not that educator that goes to that next teacher and talks about and gossips about all of the challenges that you went through dealing with that student, and you're preparing that next teacher for all of the challenges that you went through. See, we have to help our students see the best in themselves. As a former ELA teacher, I worked at a failing school, one of the worst in the state, where I went into a school that they were almost at 14% proficiency in reading on an 8th grade level. Which means, if you're still new to the field, that 14% of students were reading at an 8th grade level. See, I'm a student that graduated the top of my class in college, the top of my class in high school. And I grew up in a family where excellence wasn't a choice. It was the expectation. So coming into the school system, if I'm being honest, I judged. I'm like, how are you in the 8th grade reading at a 2nd grade level? My son at the time was at a 2nd grade level. Where did we drop the ball in the educational system? Where were your teachers? Where are your parents? All of these different things. But I recognized that my calling was bigger than the circumstances that these students came from. And the success of my students was more important than the situations that they grew up in. And it was up to me to have this idea of helping students see the best in themselves. I needed them to see, and I needed to have a belief in myself so much that it bled into my students. So it's up to you. How much do you actually believe in the success of your students? And I'm not just saying just believe it when times are easy or at the beginning of the year. I'm saying mid-year, the end of year, when that student is giving you a hard and a challenging time. The first step is you have to help your students see the best in themselves. And a strategy that I'm using across the board in education is give your students the opportunity to have a quick win. At the beginning of my time as a director of culture and student advancement across Bonnie Cone school systems, one of the quick win strategies that I used over the summer before we even got to instruction, before we even had students on our building, was creating an initiative to raise 6,000 books across our campuses. And my goal at the time was only 2,000 books on each campus, and then we were good to go. Within 2 months, we raised 18,000 and collected 18,000 books. And we were able to store 6,000 books across 3 campuses. The parents came together, the students came together, the teachers came together. Our community came together collectively so that we can be able to serve our students. I gave my parents a quick win strategy and helped them believe that there was change coming to our institution. When you think about what you want in your classroom, when you think about what you want in your school system, what is a quick win that your students can create or have or achieve so that they can believe that change is not just coming in their school, but change is coming within themselves? And once we develop this idea of helping students see the best in themselves, the second step is to help them, the E of the model, is to help them exercise grace for students' shortcomings. You, as the educator, the person listening to this. Because whether you're a principal, an assistant principal, a reading or a math interventionist, a teacher, whatever it is that you are an educator by trade. We're never former educators, we're lifelong educators. Because this isn't just a job, this is a responsibility. We have to begin to exercise grace for our student shortcomings. Many times when our students act out, when our students behave in a way that is not indicative of the values or the expectations of our classrooms, we label, we judge, and then we discipline our students. But what we must understand is that all behavior, whether good or bad, is a form of communication. Good behavior looks like confidence, belief. Bad behavior sometimes looks like I need a little bit more mentorship. I need a little bit of help. I need a hug. I need more love. I need more attention in this moment. Students are going to fall short just like you as the adult fall short. But I need us to begin to exercise grace for our students' shortcomings. Our students are not always going to get it right, but what you do when they do not get it right is more important than what you do when they get it wrong. Or when they do get it actually right. What you do when they don't get it right is more important than what you do for when they do get it right. So just like we celebrate and we give candy and we give 2 claps and we give handshakes and all of these different things, when our students get a question right or an opportunity right, when they don't get it right, how are you still celebrating their growth? How are you still celebrating their participation? How are you still celebrating them for showing up? And then number 3, when we think about the A of this heart model, it's accepting what your students come with and where your students come from. One of the biggest challenges, like I was explaining earlier with my role as an 8th grade ELA teacher, is recognizing that my story as a 2-parent home, suburban young man that grew up very privileged in a sense, is not the same as a young man that grew up without a father, without a mother, on foster care with 8 brothers and sisters, where he had to be left in a trash can with his brothers and sisters by this biological mother. My story was not the same as that young 13-year-old young lady that was pregnant for the 2nd time. My story was not the same as that young man that wore the same clothes every single day to school for 6 weeks. My story was not the same as the young man that never got a haircut. My story was not the same as that young woman that got cussed out and beat by her mother every single night. So I had to recognize that what our students come with and what they come from create something in them, a belief in their mind that sometimes cursing is okay, a belief in their mind that how I deal with certain things and how I express aggression isn't disrespect, Mr. King. It's maybe just my way of communicating and how I've been taught. This belief that promiscuity is a way that I approach life and how I show up in the classroom. But what I had to explain and how I had to expose them, I had to connect who they wanted to be and who they desired to be with the expectations, with the values, and the standard in which they wanted to be in the future. See, what kids come from is unique. See, a lot of times we praise diversity and inclusion and students to be unique in themselves, and then they actually become themselves in the classroom, and then we give them yellow cards. We write them up for referrals. We kick them out of our classrooms. We don't accept them, and we don't recognize how that beats them down more than builds them up. So we have to become people that accept what these students come from. Even if it's different than what we are used to, even if they communicate differently, they may deal with conflict differently, they may show up to class differently, we have to celebrate that difference in our classroom. One thing that I always did is I had the opportunity to ask questions. Sometimes at the end of lessons, I would just sit and ask questions. Why do you do this? Why do you wear that? Why do you communicate this way? Where did you learn how to do this? And then I would use that opportunity to empower students. Well, you said you wanted to be that doctor. Zayaja, do you really think that you'd be able to cuss somebody out in the emergency room during surgery? And then you had to just expose them, just plant a seed. See, anything in life is all about planting the seed and being that educator that continues to water it until the harvest comes. See, the challenge with most of us as educators is that we don't see the harvest. We may be the educator that plants the seed, and then 3 years later, the educator that waters it, and then 10 years from now, that student comes back to our classrooms, and they are the harvest. They get it. So when we first think about this step, it's helping students see themselves, the best in themselves. Then the E of this model is exercising grace for their shortcomings, because they're not always going to get it right. The A of this model is accepting what your students come with and where they come from. And then we have to remind ourselves that our students are valuable. You have to remind yourself and remind your student on a daily basis that they are valuable. One of the things that I did in my days of teaching is that every single day I would survey the room. I would survey behavior, I would survey body language, I would survey all of these different things to realize and see what my students are going through. See, sometimes no communication is students communicating, but you're so focused on communicating and teaching and lecturing that you're not taking time to see your students. So during independent study, during independent skills-based instruction, during them having an independent activity, what I would do is I would write down on a sticky note an affirmation. I would write down, I see you, you're doing a great job. I would write down maybe even a letter to that student on a sheet of paper, fold it up, and then just pass it to the student. Like, hey, I noticed that you're doing a great job. I want to let you know that the progress that I've seen over the last 3 weeks is I'm proud of you, all of these different things. And I would fill it up with affirmations. The challenge of this is that I never knew if it meant anything. But I just knew that I could plant and I could plant and I can water and I can water. And it wasn't until 2 days before 8th grade graduation that one of my most challenging students opened up her notebook, and it fell out of her notebook all of the sticky notes throughout the whole year that I gave her. And she looked up, she looked at me, I looked back at her, and immediately I felt a tear come down my face. Because even though I knew it was challenging times with her. She held on long enough where all of those different things were meaningful to her. If we want our students to hold on, if we want our schools to be able to hold on, if we want the institution to hold on, if we want this industry of education to hold on, we first have to learn how to hold on. So first we have to remind ourselves that we're valuable and our students need us on a daily basis, even if it's hard, even if it's challenging, even if your principal doesn't believe in you, even if your assistant principal doesn't observe you or support you, your students need you. And you have to first remind yourself that, and then it's so important for you to remind your students that they are valuable, whether indirectly or directly, whether it's through sticky notes, through Post-it notes, through cards, through affirmation, verbally, whatever it looks like, you need to let your students know that they're valuable. And then the T of the heart model is treasure your students' contributions. Treasure your students' contribution. I think out of all of these steps, whether it's helping students see the best in themselves, exercising grace for their shortcomings, accepting what your students come with and where they come from, and reminding your students that they're valuable, I think the T, the treasuring your students' contributions, is probably the most important. There was a time in my class where it was one of those days where I just wasn't feeling it. And it was during my planning period where I just needed a break, so I left, went to get me a salad, came back, ate my salad, and I just wasn't at 100%. At the bell, my students, I felt like they were literally waiting at the door. They should have been at lunch, but I don't know. They were waiting at the door because at the bell, they busted in. Mr. King, we back, baby, we're back. And I'm like, oh my God. And I know if you're an educator, you have felt that before. You just weren't really ready for your students to come back. It was maybe that long break after winter break, that long break after spring break where you needed that sun a little bit longer. And I was not ready for my students. So I had my warm up on the board. The timer was going off. And Mr. Jermaine came in the class. He said, Mr. King, I'm teaching today. And that was my moment to sit on the sideline. But I was like, Jermaine, you serious? He was like, no, Mr. King, I got it. I got you. Now, let me just give some backstory to Jermaine. He was the class clown. He was that challenging student. He was the hardball, but he, deep down, was a leader. So what did I do? I sat down. I gave Jermaine the pen to the smart board, and I said, Jermaine, you're teaching today. So we had another 45 minutes before the break period. So Jermaine taught for 45 minutes straight. And boy, was I so proud of him. When students came into the classroom, he said, Mr. King's not teaching today. I'm the teacher. And y'all know what y'all need to be doing. You need to sit down. We're going to lock in. We're going to lock in. Y'all need to sit down. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's lock in. And he's pointing at the board. He's pointing at the timer. He's passing out all of the different notebooks. He's delegating activities to all of the students. He's moving just like I would move in the classroom. The students came in quietly. Once they recognized that Jermaine was teaching, some of them laughed, some of them played, but within 7 minutes, the class was focused. I stepped back, rolled my chair back, and then I just watched. Jermaine had the students coming up to the board and highlighting the board so that they could cite textual evidence. They were choosing the right answers. He was moving through the slides like he was an educator, like he was the teacher, like he was the leader, that he was the shepherd. See, a lot of times we look at performance. We look at metrics. We look at benchmarks. We look at test scores, but we don't look at people. We don't look at potential. We don't look at opportunity. We don't look at the heart of our children. Jermaine was that student that had something that one of your most challenging students has. Jermaine was the student that your class clown has. Jermaine was the student that you just wrote up in your classroom. Jermaine is the student that you want out of your school. Jermaine's in high school now, leading, creating a business. Now he's a straight A student at his school. Jermaine was given one opportunity to lead, and I treasured that student's contribution. I treasured that young man's contribution. No matter what Jermaine had on, no matter if his hair was done or not, no matter where he came from, no matter if he had his notebook ready or not, no matter if he had a pencil every day prepared or not, no matter if he was always on time to class or not, I needed to help my students see the best in themselves. I needed to remind my students that they are valuable. I needed to exercise grace within my heart for my students' shortcomings. And I needed to ultimately accept where my students came from. And even though there were so many differences with my students, it was still up to me as the educator, as the leader, as the committed shepherd in my classroom to make a difference. This is another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. Like, subscribe, and comment below, and we'll see you guys next episode.